Prime Minister says that every rough sleeper in England will be offered a bed to sleep in this winter as part of a £442 million plan to get everyone in for Christmas.
Andy Burnham made ending rough sleeping his first promise when he entered Downing Street. But the Conservatives said there was very little detail about how the initiative will be paid for or delivered. Let's speak now to Francesca Albanese from the homeless charity Crisis. Morning, Francesca.
Good
Thanks
morning.
so much for coming in. Anyone who has been out on city centre streets recently will know there is a huge problem, isn't there, with rough sleeping at the moment. You must be really pleased by this pledge.
Yes, definitely. So firstly, to have this level of political leadership and commitment, firstly by the pledge as the Prime Minister's first instruction that he wants to end rough sleeping. But then today's announcement obviously goes further and it's putting funding into that. It's looking at how we get people off the streets now. So, you know, we've seen homelessness go up, but particularly rough sleeping, and it is one of the most dangerous and, you know, devastating things that can happen to anyone. And, you know, we see through our services day in, day out what the impact that has on individuals. So today's announcement is really, really welcome in terms of, you know, that commitment, but also making sure that we can do something now. And obviously the pledge is about doing it by Christmas. So yes, we're very, very much behind the commitment and ready to join with others to make this work.
It's rough sleeping is people who are sleeping out on the street. There are lots of different forms of homelessness, though, aren't there? Are you confident he can actually deliver this?
Yes, so I think firstly to say, you know, actually kind of pledging to end rough sleeping is a big commitment, and therefore, you know, you need to then have things that go towards that. So we've seen rough sleeping levels come down before in this country. So we saw them at very low levels in the 90s, and that was about, you know, that investment, that looking at a kind of a whole government approach. So it isn't just about homelessness and housing. Obviously, they're clearly very, very vital, but it's about what other services and government departments can do, like health.
Why is that falling apart then? Because what he's doing now is hopefully trying to bring those all back together. And why did we not learn that lesson back in the 90s?
Yeah, so I think firstly we saw a kind of, you know, we've seen a big disinvestment in public services, in welfare over the last 10 to 15 years, and that has had a massive impact on homelessness. So what we see in our services, many people come to us obviously when everything else has gone wrong, and so that kind of retraction of, you know, public service investment, people not working together has really, really affected homelessness levels. But crucially, we've also seen a lack of genuinely affordable homes. So we have not invested for decades in social housing, and that really is what's driving this. And so obviously we've got the commitment today, which is about looking at kind of, you know, how can you invest in homes to get people off the street? So we've got to have that as a sustained investment. But equally, the government have pledged £39 billion for social and affordable housing. We've got to see that now, and we've got to see that invested in homes, so we can, you know, see a sustained solution here. You know, yes, we need to get people off the streets, and, you know, the emergency now is a very, very real one and very, very dangerous for people, but you've got to have that sustained investment as well.
There could be quite a big time gap between those two things, though, isn't there? There's an emergency now, but sustained, that the building improved, creating social housing in whatever way they can, that could take years.
Yes, so I think there is also things you can do in the interim. So clearly, obviously, there's the emergency provision, and also looking at kind of how can you repurpose properties. So, you know, converting buildings, looking at empty homes. You know, we've seen that has worked in the past. And there's also other policy solutions. So we have a private rental market at the moment that is very, very unaffordable for people on low income. So our research shows that only about 2% of properties are actually affordable for people on housing benefit. We have a budget coming up. You know, we can invest in local housing allowance, and, you know, that can make the private rented sector available now, in the short to medium term, whilst we obviously start building and getting those homes sort of back on the market and making sure we have kind of house building over the longer term.
When Andy Burnham was Mayor of Greater Manchester, he made this his first priority in that location, and actually saw over time it went up and down, but Greater Manchester, or Manchester city centre, became a magnet, didn't it, for rough sleeping, because there were support networks around. So does the joined-up approach, pulling everything together, take that away?
Yes, so I think clearly rolling this out everywhere is the first positive step. So you're not only concentrating support in one area. I think the other thing we saw in Greater Manchester was the rolling out of Housing First. So that is a internationally evidenced solution about home first and then that wraparound support. So we need that everywhere. And I think, you know, when we look at kind of joining up health, homelessness, housing, you know, criminal justice, and making sure that's, you know, everybody's business and that it isn't only concentrated in Greater Manchester, you know, we're looking at the whole country. That's a really, really positive step forward. And it means we can build on that and make sure that, you know, we have sustainable kind of bringing down of the rough sleeping numbers and everybody working together.
It's a really striking comment in what we've heard from the government, isn't it? Which is to get everyone in for Christmas. That's you can admire that statement, can't you? But it's not going to work, is it? Because they won't be able to get everybody in for Christmas across England. There will be someone somewhere rough sleeping.
So I think firstly you've got to have that ambition.
Yeah. So what is success? What does success look like?
I mean, success looks like people having options, and so that's about everybody working together. So, you know, councils, charities like Crisis, other partners, housing associations. So, you know, we're all standing ready to do this, and you know, we do think it is possible. You can get people off the streets quickly. You know, we have done it before. We saw that in the pandemic, but it's also about kind of making sure that, you know, you do have the homes there. So it's the emergency accommodation, and we clearly can do that. And I think, you know, winter is extremely dangerous for people who are rough sleeping, so it is possible. So it's the homes, it's the emergency accommodation, and it's the support, and then it's kind of looking at what next. So not just stopping here, but making sure there is a plan, you know, for 2, 5, 10 years down the line, because that is what makes a difference.
Thank you very much for coming in. It's good to see you, Francesca Albanese from the homelessness charity Crisis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.